For this demo, we will be modeling a simple oscillating fan and exporting that and optimizing the animations for augmented reality. The standard file formats for augmented reality are the GLIFT format developed by the open source Kronos group and adopted as the standard for Android and a variety of 3D modeling programs and game engines. And then the other format is the USDZ format, also an open source format, originally designed by Pixar Studios and has been launched into popularity because it's been adopted by Apple as the standard AR format for both their PCs and mobile devices. So here you can see we have this oscillating fan here in Blender, and I've selected the fan blade and the motor separately so you can see how we have kind of a complex animation going here where the motor and the blade are both animated. And in fact, the blade's animation is parented to the motor. So let's go ahead and make a new file, and we will go into the basics of how we can quickly model this fan and then get into the technical stuff. So the first thing that we will do is we will delete the default cube and add a cylinder. I'm not sure how important it is, but I know that I'm going to have 5 blades, so I want the vertices to be divisible by 5, or the edges. So I'm going to set the vertices setting on this cylinder to 25. Now in edit mode, I will select the top face and press Control B to bevel. And you can see it's beveling it down into a cone, but if I scroll down on the mouse wheel or slide up and down on the trackpad with 2 fingers, the trackpad thing is specific to Macs, I can kind of turn this into a little dome shape, and that looks pretty good to me. So now I'll go back into object mode and I will add a cube. And in edit mode, so I'm not making any changes to the shapes in object mode at this point, I'm going to go ahead and squash this down. So I'll press S and Z and kind of flatten this cube on the Z axis. I'll press G and Y to bring it out a little bit, S and Y to elongate it along the Y axis, G and Y again. So G key to grab, Y to move it only on the Y axis, and kind of move it out from the middle. I think I'll make this a little narrower at the ends actually. So I will press S again and the X axis and make this skinnier. I want to give the profile of this fan, or the face of this fan, I want it to have kind of a more, almondy shape. So I'm going to turn it into a hexagon. I'm going to do that by pressing Command R or Control R and putting one loop cut right in the middle. And then I'll press S to enlarge that loop cut and X for the X axis. And now you can see the top of my blade has this nice hexagonal shape. I'm also going to go ahead and select the bottom face of this fan, and I'm going to shrink that a little bit on the X axis so the connection point of the fan is even skinnier. And while I have this face selected, I'm also going to press Shift and E to create a crease, and then 1 to create a full value of 1 on that crease. I can now go ahead and in object mode, I will add a subdivision surface modifier, set the settings for 2 and 2 for viewport and render. Or maybe we'll go to 3 and 3 so it looks even nicer. No, let's not make this too nice. We want to keep this moving quickly, processor wide. So we'll just go 2 and 2, and there we have our basic fan blade. And before we do anything else to this fan blade, we're going to set up an array. So I'll set up another modifier here, and that one will be the array modifier. And by default, we've got this relative offset setting, which means that it's going to create another fan blade and it's going to move it on the x-axis by a factor of 1. So it's moving it the distance of one of these objects. So if the object was bigger, it would be a bigger distance. I'll set the count here to 5. So we can see we've got 5 fan blades. And now we're going to turn off relative offset because we don't need that nonsense. It's not helpful for a fan blade. What we're going to use is object offset. And we'll use this little dropper here. And the object we will select is the cylinder. And if nothing happens except it says cylinder down here, you're on the right track. If you get a wacky arrangement of different size fan blades all over your screen, it means that you have not applied all your transformations to both of these objects. So now that we have done that, you can see that if we rotate this middle object, it will it'll move our array of blades around it. So I'll press escape here because we don't need to do it like that. So what we want to do is rotate this object by a specific amount, which is we want to rotate it by 1/5 of 360 degrees so that we can move all 5 fan blades around evenly. So I'll press N for these basic transform menus here. I'll select my middle cylinder, and here for the Z rotation, I can just type in 360 / for divided by and 5, and perhaps any self-respecting person knows that 360 divided by 5 is 72, but you don't need to know. And maybe you have 7 blades, maybe it gets weirder. So I thought it's useful to just use that math setting. So here we have our blades, and we do not want to try to correct their position in object mode because this kind of wonderful but horrible thing will happen. Instead, we are going to look on the z-axis. We will go into edit mode. And remember, in edit mode, you shift the geometry, but you do not actually alter the origin point, which is why we can get away with all sorts of fun stuff. We've still got this bottom face selected. I'll reselect that there. So before I do anything else, I actually want to rotate this blade a little bit, or I should say I want to twist it a little bit. So I'll press R for rotate, Y for y-axis, and give the blade a little twist at the bottom. Now I'll press A and look at this from the top, and I'll press G for grab, Y for y-axis, and we can plug these blades right into the cylinder structure here. Now, I like the way this fan looks. I think it has kind of a cool propeller quality to it. But if you think that the outside of the blades should be wider, you can easily do that. We can click on this blade here and press S and X to elongate it on the x-axis. And then our blades get wider at the outside. So, just a matter of taste. Keep in mind, though, it's really important that our master blade, we'll call it, the one that's being spread out onto an array, is made in line with one of our main world axes. That really saves us a lot of trouble because it allows us to make very easy adjustments to that blade. So the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all and press R and rotate the whole blade on the y-axis a little bit. I'm just going to go with what looks good. This looks like a pretty good fan to me. So now we're not going to need to apply any of these modifiers because it's going to happen automatically in a moment. I just want this to all be one structure. So I'm going to select these blades and I'm going to select the middle, and I'm going to press Control-Shift-B, which should bring up the Bool tool. If this isn't coming up, you need to enable it in your preferences. It's one of your add-ons called Bool tool. And I'm going to do Auto Boolean Union. And now you can see when I look here, we just have one mesh for this whole piece. And you can also see there are no modifiers on it. So when you do an auto Boolean function, in addition to merging or subtracting or whatever, it's going to apply all your modifiers in the process, which in this case, we want that. I should mention, I'll mention this again later, that when exporting to any of the AR formats, you need to apply all your modifiers because, keep in mind, that when you look at an AR file, unlike a 360 VR video or something like that, it is rendering it in real time. It's not pre-rendered. So, you know, an iPhone or an Android phone doesn't have the same subdivision, subsurface modifiers as Blender does. So you need to apply that stuff. So I'll right click on this and set it to smooth. I will also, going into settings here, go to normals and turn on auto smooth. And there we have our frame blade. I see a few weird little issues. You know, I could have put a higher subdivision on it, but I just want to keep this simple for now. So this we're not trying to make it perfect, just good enough. One little detail I might add to the fan in edit mode. I'll grab this bottom face, I'll press G to move it, Z to bring it up a little bit, and then I for inset, E for extrude, just to give it a little more of a mechanical structure to it. Now we're going to be building this fan pointing sideways, not pointing up. So in object mode, I'm going to press R, X, 90, and rotate this so this is facing forward. I'm going to shrink myself so I can see what I'm doing here. There we go. So from here, we're going to build the rest of the apparatus. We have 3 more components. We've got the base, the motor, and the cage that will protect someone's hands from touching the blades. But before we do that, I'm looking at the dimensions here, and it says that this fan is about 9 meters wide, which is really big. So we'll press S, and scale it down until the size of our fan is, I don't know, about half a meter. Did that turn upside down? Yeah, I must have gone too far. So let me do that again. We'll scale it till it's about half a meter. There, that looks good. And now I'm just going to press Command A and apply all transforms. And you can see that those rotation numbers, the scale numbers, rotations have all gone to 0 and scale have all gone to 1. So next we can add the motor to our fan. So we'll press Shift A and we will add a cylinder. We will rotate that on the X axis. So we'll press R and then X and then type 90. Press Enter or return. I'll now scale this down, zoom in a little bit, and move it on the Y axis. Make it a little bigger. This is all really, you don't have to make this exactly the same. In edit mode, I'm going to give this kind of a mid-century modern aerodynamic look. So I will press G for grab, Y to move this out a little bit, and then Command B for bevel or Control V. And you can see it's still doing the dome thing because that's the last thing I did. If I wanted to just give it a cone shape in the back, I could scroll back down, or in this case, we'll scroll up. And here we have our dome structure. Then I'm still in face select. I'm going to press Shift and add that last face to my selection. And I'm going to press S and Y to kind of stretch that out a little bit, maybe G and Y. So grab and Y to give it kind of a cool pseudo aerodynamic look. So there's all sorts of cool details. I could add like bevels and vents and stuff in here. But again, this is more about animation. So we're keeping this simple. Next, let's start naming our parts. So let's call the first cylinder, let's call it blades. Next one, we'll call it motor. A little switch on the motor would also be a nice touch, but we're not going to do it. We'll set that to shade smooth, auto smooth. Now let's go ahead and add the cage. For the cage, we will press Shift A and we will add a UV sphere. And we will set this we'll go with these settings to start. We'll go with 10 and 5, which are not the default settings. You might need to set those. And now we will go into edit on this sphere. And what we're going to do in edit mode is we are going to select the top vertices. We're going to press X, and we're going to press this option, dissolve vertices. We're going to do the same thing on the bottom, and this is going to change the top and bottom to flat faces. We're also going to go ahead and select both these top and bottom faces and press S, Shift Z to bring those in. So we have this kind of funky shape we're building here. And then we're actually going to press X and delete those two faces. So we kind of have a hole going through here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go into object mode, and we are going to add a modifier here, and we will add subdivision surface. We'll start with it set to 1 and 1, and then we'll add another modifier called wireframe. And you can see our cage for our fan is starting to form. So I'll go ahead and press S for scale, Z for the Z axis, and scale our mesh down this way. I'll press R for rotate, X for X axis, type in 90, rotate it 90 degrees. And then I'm just going to scale the whole thing down evenly until it kind of moves around the fan. So we have some little changes we can make. So for one thing, I can see that I don't like how this gets so pointy here at the edge. One thing I can do is I can subdivide it again, which actually looks fine. That's probably the way to go. Another thing I can do is I can make further edits here. So I can press, for instance, Command R, make a loop cut along the middle. So we've added a little geometry here, and then you can see that that's added just a little bit more going around the edges. Or you can just go with the way it started, because it doesn't really matter that much. So you can see our edges are kind of thicker from some dimensions than others. That's because we need to apply our scale and position. So I'll press Command A, and I'll apply all transforms. And now my frame looks way too thick. That's okay, because we have a thickness setting here. We can maybe just add a 0 into that. Maybe we'll make it 0, 0, 5. Or we can just scroll on it until it looks good, which seems to be a better approach. And there are some techniques to make this out of curves if you want to have like perfectly curved wire, but that takes a little more time to demonstrate, and I really want to get ahead to the animations. So because we're going to export this, we'll just get ahead of the game, and we're going to apply all these modifiers here. So one way we can do that is we can hit apply and apply, but if you apply them in the wrong order, bad things happen. A quick way to apply all your modifiers is you can select your actual object and right click, or better yet, just hit spacebar for search and type convert, and we'll just convert this to mesh, and you can see all our modifiers have been merged together in a way that gives us the right result, gives us the result we're looking at. Okay, so our fan is almost complete. The last thing we need is the base. So I'm going to select the motor, and I'm going to right click here, and we have this option snap in object mode, and we're going to do cursor to selected. So that moved our cursor right to the middle point or the axis point of the motor. And now we will press Shift A. We'll add a cylinder right there. Scale that way down, moving it on the Z axis. And now before I go into edit mode, I will press Command A and apply all transforms. Actually, scratch that. Let me undo. I'll press Command A and apply scale, because I want to keep the origin point in the middle of the object. And now in edit mode, maybe I'll make the whole thing a little bit bigger. And then another way to inset, I'm going to press E for extrude and S. Bring this in a little bit. Look at it from the side. We'll press E to extrude. We'll press E and S to go out again, make it look like this thing telescopes to adjust the height. E to extrude. E again. S. E to extrude. And now we've completed our model. We've got our whole fan on its base. So we'll shade this smooth, set it to auto smooth, and shade this smooth too if we want. And this is looking pretty good. So before we get to the animation, we need to set up the appropriate parenting for this. So essentially, we just need to think about this of what turns with what. And I like to use the fan because it's a very familiar mechanical device. So we know that the oscillation has to do with this motor rotating back and forth. And we also know that the fan blade spins. So we can just think about this like if you were actually turning it with your hand. So if you were to grab the stand and move it around, the whole thing should move. So everything eventually will need to be parented to the stand. So the way we will do this is first we'll select the fan blade, and then we'll select the motor. We'll just press Control P, and we'll do parent object keep transform. And now we'll do the same thing with the cage. We'll click the cage first, then we'll click the motor. So you want your parent to be the yellow selection, not the red. Press Control P again, parent object keep transform. And now we'll select the motor and then the base and press Control P again, parent object keep transform. So now, and I should have named these things a little better. Let me go ahead and name those. So this sphere should be called cage. And this cylinder should be called base. So now if we grab the base, it will move the whole thing. I'm just pressing escape to cancel. If we grab the motor, it'll move the parts that are attached to the motor. And if we grab the fan, it'll move on its own. So this is good. So now we can actually start our animation, and we'll stay in just basic layout mode to start. Just pulling up the bottom to make the timeline a little more visible. Sorry, I accidentally hit a key there. And the first thing we'll do is we'll just animate this fan blade. So I'd like my animation to be, let's say, 4 seconds long. So I know it's 24 frames a second, so I'll hit 24 asterisk sign for multiply times 4. And there, we got 96 frames. If you want to look at your animation in terms of time, in the view section, you can actually choose show seconds, and then it'll show it in terms of the seconds. So you can see 0, 2, 4, all our seconds are displayed. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to insert our first point. So I'll press I and rotation. And you can see the rotation has all turned yellow there. Now I'm going to skip to the end, and we will change that Y rotation. So I'll press R, Y, and I'm just going to pick a number for now. We want it to rotate at least, twice. The fan should move pretty quickly, so we want it to rotate at least twice. So I'll set it to 700 degrees, and then press I and insert a frame for rotation. I can also just hover over here and press I, and that will also set the rotation. So now let's see how this animation looks. We can press play. And we have a few problems, right? So first off, we can see the fan kind of slows down towards the animation, which is not great for the looping effect. We can also see that it makes a jump right about there. So first thing we can do is change the slowdown effect. So having selected the object, I'm going to hover over the timeline, and I'm going to press T, and we're going to set the time interpolation to linear. And going forward, you can also go to your preferences and animation. And here we have our default interpolation, and we can set that default interpolation to linear, so you don't have to set that again in the future. So this should improve things a bit. It's not going to slow down, but it's still, we can see, makes a little jump. It's not too conspicuous. And the reason for that jump is we can see our first frame looks like this and our last frame like that. So it's a little bit of an awkward transition between those frames. So we could calculate the exact difference and change our degrees up here, but a much easier way to do it is I can just press play, and I can take this point and I can drag it past the timeline. I'm just going to see what looks good. It was actually pretty close, so it looks like, let's see if we drag it way out. Actually, that looks good right there. So an intuitive way to do it, we have slowed down the fan in the process, but we get a nice flow there, and it really does just keep turning. So the next thing we want to do is set our oscillation. So we'll go back to our first frame, and we can select our motor here, and I want it pointing one way, so I'll press R, Z for the Z axis, 45 degrees. And of course, I can also type 45 degrees in right here. And I will press I to insert the frame. I'm now going to go to the middle, 2 seconds. And I'm going to go to the Z, and I'm going to just add a little minus there. So it's pointing the other way, and I'll press I for insert frame. And then to get the original setting back, I'm actually going to select that first timeline point and press Shift D and move that all the way to the end. And now we can watch our animation. Our bass moves. And we might get a little bit of a jump at the end, but I don't actually see it, so I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so now that we have our fan set up, we need to get this ready to export. So there's different ways to think about animation. One thing to think about is we have multiple tracks going in this animation. So our fan is spinning on one track and the oscillating motor is spinning on another. But another thing to think about here is that this is really a cyclic animation we're looking at, or a better way to think of it is nonlinear. The point of this animation is not to tell a story of the fan starting on one side and making its way to the other side. It's that it's going to continue to move. So what we want to do is we want to set this up properly so it will play as a continuous animation. But before that, let's make some trouble. Let's make a common mistake. So let's just go to export, glyph. You can see I have USDZ here. There's an add-on for Blender to export directly to the Pixar Apple format, but I find it to be unreliable. So we'll export to glyph. I'll just put it in this folder called glyph. And I'll call it fan1, and I'll hit export. So here I have my folder with my fan, and here in my web browser, I have 2 really good browser-based viewers where you can inspect your file. So the one I'll start out with is this one called Babylon.js. It's called sandbox.babylon.js. And this is a great tool for just quickly looking at your glyph file to see that it exported properly. So I'll drag it into here, and the fan blade is spinning because that's the first thing we animated, but nothing else. That's all we've got. If we click here, we can see we actually have two tracks. So I can switch to motor action. And now it'll show us that the motor is turning, but the blade is not. So typically AR formats can only support one animation track. So what we need to do is put these into the same track. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the top corner of my frame here. And now I can change this to all sorts of other types of frames. So I could switch this to, you know, the UV editor. I could switch it to another 3D viewport. You can set any window to anything, but what we want is non-linear animation. So now we've got two timelines here set for our non-linear animation. And each of them have this little button called push down. We're going to click that on both. And that's going to embed these animations into proper tracks. And we're going to just name the tracks the same thing. So we're going to call them fan and fan. And now we will export our lift again. And this time I'll just call it fan. And now we can drag this one in, and right off the bat, it's animating properly. So we haven't added any materials here, so we can quickly do that. For this material, I'll make it kind of blue. We'll go into material view so we can actually see our materials. And metallic, maybe I'll go for kind of cyan metallic. And then for the cage part, I'll give it kind of a gold color. So make it metallic, I'll make it a little shinier. And then I'll go ahead and just quickly, that looks a little green, huh? So let's go back to that. It's fine. So now I'll go and just set these all to be the same material as that. So we have a little more material to go on this. And let's go ahead and export again. So we'll go to File, Export, Glyph. Now we'll look at our setup again. We'll drag our fan in. And now we've got our materials and our fan is moving. So this thing is a great viewer. And whoops, sorry, it's just directly tracked to the mouse there. That's crazy. Okay. Okay, so this program is a great viewer, and it's particularly handy that it can show you how many motion tracks you have. But if we want to get a sense of how compatible this is going to be with iOS devices, we have another viewer. And that one is on this website, Space.io. And they have this viewer called Playground. And they start out by showing us this beautiful model of a table. So we can take our fan and we can drop it in here. And we can see that this looks pretty good. And we can view it here with different HDRIs. So we can have a blue sky reflected on it or a fireplace. And to actually convert this to a USDZ, so we can view it on our phone, is very simple. We simply click this option, Make USDZ, and that will convert and then take a few seconds. Then we can choose this option, Download USDZ. And we can then easily take that file and open it on an iOS device, and it will immediately place it directly into the native AR interface.